One of the things I'm really excited to share with you guys is this thing called interval notation. And the reason I'm excited to share it with you is because it's so powerful. It's something that we're going to learn today, you're going to get more familiar with, and by the time you're done with this course, you should feel very comfortable using it. And you can use it in any level of math you go on after this. So why is this powerful? Because remember when we were talking about getting solutions to equations? We can say x equals 5. Okay. But especially when we're dealing with inequalities, we have things that are like x is greater than 7. And there's lots of numbers that are greater than 7, tons of numbers that are greater than 7. And this is a shortcut way to express a set of numbers, or a lot of numbers. We're going to use it to express numbers that are solution points. Remember, a solution point is something that makes the equation or the inequality true. Shortcuts to tell us about solution points for an inequality, an equation, or even a graph. So we're going to look at 3 different types on this page. We're going to say, okay, looking at a graph, how do you write interval notation? Looking at an inequality, how do you write interval notation? And then from interval notation, how do you go backwards? Here we are, I'm talking about interval notation. What do I mean by that? Interval notation uses a couple of symbols. I'll show you what the symbols are, and then I'll show you how we use them. It uses brackets, which can go either way here. It uses parentheses, and sometimes it uses this special thing called union, which is just a U. We're going to use these anytime you see symbols that are greater than or equal to symbols. Those get brackets, nice and square, very stiff. Other times, when you see just greater than without the equal sign, we use parentheses. And of course, this could include the less than symbol, and this one could include the less than or equal to symbol. So I'll talk about how we use those, but brackets for greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, parentheses for just greater than, less than. And like I said, we'll sometimes use this special union symbol. The best way I can explain this is to look at a graph, okay? Looking at a graph, you see what they've shaded here? They've shaded everything from 0 to 2. And they're using these brackets, which is really the same as having a shaded dot at the end of our number line. Interval notation for this would simply be to say that I have a bracket, I started at 0, and I continued all the way up to 2. So we'll say comma, I continued to 2, and I stopped. Or I could have one that has parentheses. This is the same thing as having an open circle on a graph. You might remember those open circles from Algebra 1. Parentheses or open circles, same thing. Where did we start? Well, I started at -1, and then I shaded everything all the way up until 2, and then I stopped. Now remember, a closed circle means you do get to include 0. So this would be like having a greater than or equal to symbol, including the 0 and including the 2. These ones here, open circles or parentheses, means you don't get to include the -1 or the 2. You get super, super close to it. So for example, I'm including all the numbers 1.99999 as many nines as you want to add up until 2, but not 2 itself. Super, super close. That's what the open circle or the parenthesis means. You can have them together. So you might see a graph that has a closed dot and an open circle at the same time. You simply say, I started at 0, I got to include it. I went all the way up to 3, but not touching 3. Here's another one, a bracket. So I started at 2, and I continued up until, now there's an arrow. It keeps going. It didn't stop. When do I stop? At the end of my number line, whenever that is, right? Well, the number line goes on and on and on and on and on. Remember Buzz Lightyear, to infinity and beyond? Never stops. So we go up to infinity. Now, can you capture infinity? Can you touch it? No, because it's infinity and beyond. Infinity keeps going. So you never put a bracket around the infinity symbol. The infinity always gets a parenthesis symbol. So let's make a quick note of ourselves. Anytime we're dealing with this, bracket, not allowed. Never with infinity. Always a parenthesis. Here's one where it kept going off and off and off into the distance, but it went the other way on the number line. So instead of heading towards positive infinity like this one did, this one headed to negative infinity. So I'll say, well, I actually went to negative infinity leftwise, and again, I could not capture it, so I'm going to use a parentheses. And then I came up and I stopped at 0, and I do get to include the 0, so I'll use a bracket. Here's another mixed one. -1, not included, all the way up to 1, included, or bracket. These are interval notation here in green. These are the graphs. And again, the graphs might have the brackets and the parentheses on it, or it might have open and closed circles. Just flip through your notes really quick to the next page. Let me just show you an example. Here are some graphs that actually have open circles and closed circles. So this one here has a closed circle, and it's shaded, 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 open circle. There's no parentheses or brackets on the graph. Notice that when they have the closed circle, they used a bracket, -3, comma, all the way up to 5, parentheses, open circle. Now, you have actually seen this before. You have seen this in an inequality way. Before, you would talk about this graph and say, I went from -3 less than or equal to x, which was less than 5. And you put the x in between the -3 and the 5. Or you might have seen x greater than 2. And so you said, okay, I don't get to include the 2, it's an open circle, and I shaded everything greater than 2. Interval notation says, don't include the 2, get really close to it, and keep going all the way till you get to infinity, all the way out here. But you can't touch infinity, so we'll use a parenthesis. So these are two really nice ways for you to see how do I say it using inequality language, how do I use interval notation, what we're learning about, and then how do I graph it. We'll come back to this page in a little bit. Let's go back to page 12. So now that you've looked at the graph and written in interval notation, now we're going to look at inequalities and use interval notation. It says to do the interval notation first, then graph on a number line. You can do that. I often find it easier to look at the graph. Even if I'm not drawing the graph on my paper, once you get better and more proficient at this, you might not be drawing the graph on your paper, but you should still be visualizing it in your head. So we're going to just go ahead and visualize the graph now, and then we'll do interval notation. So what is this telling us? X is greater than or equal to 0. So 0. It's closed circle because it's greater than or equal to. Shaded all the way up until we hit 4. And it's another closed circle. Using interval notation, this is bracket. I went from 0 all the way up to 4. Closed circles on both ends. This one goes from 4 to 6. I included the 4, I did not include the 6, and I shaded everything in between. So bracket 4, 6, parenthesis. X is greater than or equal to 4. So here's my 4. X is greater than, so shading upwards, bracket 4, all the way up to infinity. Next one here. X is less than -4. I don't get to include it, so it's open circle, and less than, so smaller than 4, -4, excuse me. This time, -infinity, comma, -4. Parentheses, and again, always a parentheses on infinity. A couple more here. -1 to 5, open circles. So parentheses, -1, comma, 5, parentheses. -2, 0, open circles, parentheses, -2, 0, parentheses. 5, closed circle, x is less than or equal to 5. So -infinity, comma, 5. Bracket on the 5 because you got to include it. You don't include the infinity. And 1, open circle. X is greater than 1, 1, comma, infinity. This would be an algebraic way of saying this because you're using a variable or an expression. This one would be the graphical way to say this because you're actually putting it on a graph. And this would be the numerical way because all you're using is numbers and symbols. What we're talking about, what we're hearing in my voice, that would be the verbal. So you've actually seen all 4 ways right here. Isn't that cool? All right, so now this shows us you've really got it. Now we're going to take interval notation, write it as an inequality, and then graph it. Again, I think the graph is one of the most powerful things for this, so we're actually going to do the graph first and then do the inequality. If you want to do it the other way, if that works for you, that's fine. But we're going to work it this way. So, graphing this. This means 2 to 5 closed circles because of the brackets, shade between. So what does that mean? That means that x is greater than or equal to 2, but it's less than or equal to 5 at the same time. Here's one with parentheses. -3 to -2. Open circles. -3 is less than x, which is less than -2. Here's one with an infinity. Good. So 4, bracket means closed circle, and we're shading all the way up to infinity. So x is greater than or equal to 4. One with a negative infinity. Parentheses means open circle, and going to negative infinity means shading this way on our number line. So we'll go from, whoops, I need to think about interval notation. X is less than -3. All right, a couple more down here. From 1 to 2, open circles again. 1 is less than x, which is less than 2. This one here. 0 to 1, a closed circle at 0, an open circle at 1. So 0 is less than or equal to x. This one is just less than 1. And 2 more with infinity here. Closed circle, I'm going to negative infinity. So x was less than or equal to +2. And this one here, -8, open circle, and heading towards positive infinity. So x was greater than -8. Okay, so that's a lot of different practice with this interval notation. Again, we're going to use this throughout the year and in some of our other lessons. This page, page 13, is for you to complete as homework. You need to fill in the rest of the missing pieces of this chart. So if it's a missing graph and interval notation, or maybe the inequality in the graph. However you want to do it, all these pieces need to be filled in as part of your homework. Okay? So, powerful tool. I'm really excited to show it to you guys, and I'm excited for us to start using this in our lessons.